Good morning, everyone. My name is Frank Lenahan. I'm the Dean of the College of Business here, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and to wish you a good morning. I know you had a good evening last night. Obviously, this is a great way for us to showcase our new facility, and I will spend a little more time on why this facility is here a little bit later. But I first want to recognize our faculty who are here. One of our strategic objectives in the college is to grow our economics group and our economics enrollment. We're introducing a Master's of Economics this fall. We've had a long-standing PhD program in economics, and we find that obviously these students are some of the most academically gifted students that we have at the undergraduate level. So we, this past year, raised our economics department to a School of Economics to highlight the faculty and to highlight this fact that it's a very important strategic initiative for us. Let me just introduce the faculty who are here. Dr. Andre Kerman will be speaking later. Also, Dr. Babas Madan, our director of the school, Dr. Costa Surface, and Dr. Maria Olivero. So again, it's really a pleasure because this fits so well with the expertise that we have and the national, international reputation that we have in the school for international trade and monetary policy. As I mentioned before, this building just opened, and it really is a tribute to the person I've been asked to introduce, our former dean, Dr. George Tzechekos. George will spend 10 years of his life, and probably feels like it was 50 years of his life being dean here. And it really was through his vision and through his dedication to our students, dedication to this university, that this building came into being. So it's been it's very difficult, obviously, to follow a legend. You know, if you think about all the basketball coaches, football coaches, and in any other area, any other leadership area, when you follow a legend, it's a difficult challenge. And it's been a difficult challenge for me, but it's been an honor because George and I are good friends. He's a real mentor. I still call him and ask him, and he just laughs at me now. He says, "Oh, I remember those days." So again, I want to recognize the contributions that he's made, and again, introduce Dr. George Tzechekos. Thank you, Frank. Thanks, George.
Such a nice introduction. I appreciate always Frank has been gracious to me, and I really am very happy because the Lebeau College of Business is in good hands. Even though he's not an economist, he's really a leadership management professor, and under his leadership, Lebeau is doing better and better, much better compared to 10 years of my tenure here at Lebeau. But I have a different role today. I'm the chair of GIC, and I want to say how pleased I am that we have such a great program today for you. GIC is an organization that focuses on expanding the global dialogue on economic matters and brings together experts, economists, policymakers, academics, and the media in an effort to debate and create a very good background of analyzing recent events that impact international economics, international finance. We have the privilege to have with us in our board outstanding individuals that they contribute so much to the growth of organization. I want to mention to you that every year we hold anywhere between 15 to 20 conferences and forums and panel discussion across the world. Most recently we were in Paris. We plan to be in London within, I think, a few weeks, actually in May. We do have a conference up in New York on ETFs, and we continuously involve in our organization with a vision and the support of our members, 500 plus or so. And we have the really great programming. For those of you not members, I would, go outside and sign up right away and become member of GIC. With this, later on, I will introduce several of our board members here. Michael Drury, perhaps he's here. He's our vice chair of programs who has worked so hard to put together our programming activities on an annual basis. And please talk to Mike about the upcoming events. Also, I want to recognize some of the GIC staff members. Ben Gregg is our executive director. He is outside, I see him. Amanda and Jill are doing a tremendous job Jill is here, okay. Tremendous job in the logistics, but fundamentally, especially for this program here, Lisa Bogan has done an outstanding job. She's a director of external relations for the Lebeau College of Business, and I want to thank her for the support. This program was made possible simply because an individual with a lot of passion for GIC has provided support over the years, and this is an individual who doesn't need introductions. Is Bill Dangelberg, an emeritus dean of the Fox School of Business, and emeritus chair of GIC, and I don't know what would be the other emeritus thing that we can put you in your next to your qualifications, but I want to thank him for all the hard work and dedication in coming up with this program. And Bill, it's yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Of all the introductions I've had, that was definitely the most recent. I mean, how many times can you say emeritus? We might as well just say old. Anyway. Yeah, GIC is a great organization. I was with it for at least 20 years or somewhere around in there, and we've come a long way. So I'm glad that you all came a long way. You can tell that the weather continues to affect our programs, including my condition, but also I'm sure that a lot of the people who were coming this morning thought, oh no, it's too cold. So we'll have to see how many of them actually warm up and start moving and join us as the program moves along. So this program is about monetary policy. It's obviously a headline. You know, in the olden days, nobody paid much attention to the Fed. It was very quiet. They didn't make announcements about things, and the Fed just did its job. But now it's kind of the headline on all the financial news programs and in the newspapers. Everything's about the Fed. The Fed is, the Federal Reserve is supposed to save us all because Washington, the fiscal policy side can't seem to get its act together. So, and also, of course, there's no escaping the fact that our Fed is a global institution. Things that happen here affect everybody, not necessarily in a favorable way. And so we'll hear lots of discussion about the impact of that. So we're now seeing monetary policy in transition. So we assembled a bunch of great experts to talk to you today. I'm not going to introduce them in detail. We have nice resumes and bios in the program, so I encourage you to look at them. So we'll start off with a quick look at how the economy is working, that kind of set the stage for where we are, what our issues are. And then we'll proceed from there to talk about monetary policy and transition. So our first famous speaker, Stu Hoffman, chief economist for PNC, and of course, longtime friend of the Global Interdependent Center. Stu, it's all yours.
Yeah, wait, you hold off on a minute. Thank you. I guess I'll stand here and, well, if I go back here, you can't see me. Close enough. I assume you can all hear me. Good morning. Thank you, Dunk. Pleasure to be on this panel with lots of friends. We won't emeritus friends, like Dunk and Mickey and Bill and Catherine, etc. It is a great program. I'm very pleased to be able to kick it off and give you a broad economic overview, and then obviously, as was said, okay, there we go. As was said, we'll get into a lot more detail on some of the monetary policy implications of it, both domestic and, of course, the global implications as well. I don't have a PowerPoint. I did, you have on my table there our latest economic newsletter. I want to try to go through that and give you some of the highlights of that. I guess I would put myself maybe slightly more positive than the consensus, although the consensus seems to be perhaps moving up in terms of whether this is the year the U.S. economy, after growing about 2% in real GDP terms over the last 4 years of this so-called economic recovery, can at least get up to trend or hopefully above trend economic growth, which would be at least 2.5% for real GDP, maybe something closer to 3%, and with that, generate a little more job growth, some corporate earnings growth, and the other positive things, even within the unemployment situation, maybe reducing the unusually long term of unemployment duration that many people are still suffering under, and bring down maybe some of the part-time work, turn that into full-time work. So what's going to do that, though? You know, kind of what are the driving forces underlying the economy that we think can push it forward? And of course, back to monetary policy, an important part of that. The debate that's been going on in the markets lately is we know economic growth was off to a slow start in the first couple months of the year. And since, like this morning, reminds us we can't quite shake, at least in this part of the country, can't quite shake off this bone-chilling weather. Is it more the weather, or is there something much weaker in the economy, consumer spending, business investment, fiscal policy, a lack of, say, generation or monetary policy effectiveness? I'm of the opinion that the weather did play an important role in keeping economic growth off to a slow start. Obviously, though, we're kind of at the point where you can't blame it on the weather anymore, even after this morning. So I think we've got to see better economic data. And I'm a bit encouraged, the data we've seen on March. Retail sales were quite strong just before I got up here, and I'll be anxious to see whether housing starts were announced, or they were announced, whether they did any improving in March. But auto sales were better, job growth was somewhat better, retail sales were better. I think we'll probably see over the next couple of months better housing data, consumer confidence, income growth. All of those things in March were noticeably better. Now, saying that, you know, any 1 month the data can do just about anything, and so I'm always a big fan of looking at underlying trends. So still, when you look at the first quarter, more than likely when it's announced in a couple of weeks, GDP growth was less than 2%, maybe 1.5% to 2%. That's not good enough, and it certainly makes it harder to break out to 2.5% to 3% economic growth. But the next few months really will kind of the rubber match. If the economy doesn't look better this spring, jobs, consumer spending, business investment, certainly housing, and putting a global spin on it, exports, and which were quite weak in February, then I think you'll see a lot of adjustments in the markets. People adjusting down forecasts to say, well, we really have not been able to break out of this subpar rut the economy's been stuck in at around 2% economic growth. That is, I think, what we're going to figure out in the next few months. As I said at the beginning, I'm a little bit more on the optimistic side. I do think the data this spring will show that the economy was held back and there's some catching up and picking up to do, and that going forward into the latter part of the year, the second half of the year, that momentum can be sustained. I think some of it is monetary policy. Some of it, I think, is definitely less drag from fiscal policy. We don't have a repeat of the last several years in terms of the uncertainty or the threat of a government shutdown or another increase in taxes or reduction in spending. If anything, the bipartisan budget deal a couple of months ago replaced the sequester with slightly less fiscal restraint. Although, if you're like me and you finished up your taxes yesterday, you found out the tax hike turned out to be a bit more of a problem. A little more taxing at the upper income levels, I guess, than might have been thought, and we're going to see that. probably in why the CBO just revised down again its deficit projection for for this year and the next couple of years, and I suspect they're still somewhat on the high side. But fiscal restraint is not there, and even some degree of fiscal uncertainty has been reduced. And so I do think that also was a drag on the economy. So where does the growth come from? Well, always consumers, always all of us, because we're still 70% of the economy. I think we are going to see about 2.5 million new jobs this year. Clearly, we didn't see that in the first quarter, which means to make up for that, we are going to, if I'm right, start seeing some 200 plus monthly job numbers that come out every Friday. And, you know, these things never go in a straight line. In fact, they do just the opposite. They zigzag around like crazy. But I think the trend will be a bit better than 200,000. The unemployment rate will go down, both the U3 and probably even the so-called U6, which includes people working part-time that would rather work full-time, because I think we will see more people getting full-time jobs that want them, and probably some improvement in hours as well. Wages, it's interesting right now. If you look at wages, overall wages are still pretty steady, just over 2%. But when you break them down between supervisory workers and sort of, I'll call it blue collar, white collar, although that's not exactly the way it is. Blue collar wages are rising more rapidly now. And some of that is because we're seeing an improvement in manufacturing. I also think you're seeing productivity there, and you are seeing it. Now, the total number hasn't accelerated. It's just around 2%. If you look at average hourly earnings or the ECI, the Employment Compensation Index, that comes out every quarter. But I think we will actually see a little bit of acceleration of wages this year, from around 2% to a little over. So more people working the same or maybe more overtime hours, and on average being paid a little more. I think that provides for faster income growth. Pre-tax, probably similar after tax compared to last year, because there are no additional tax increases. And so I think that does help consumer spending grow by at least, say, 2.5% this year. That doesn't get you to the 3% GDP growth. Clearly, you need something more than that. And that's where I look at business investment. Business investment definitely, well, it's beginning to improve, certainly on the construction side. We're seeing it in the private sector. We are seeing improvements in retail and office, some office space, some hotel properties, certainly multifamily, although that's classified as residential. So the construction side of the economy. And I know PNC sees that, and we see that very clearly. One of the strongest growth in loans is in commercial real estate. And that's been going on for some time now, and I think we're seeing better deals. We are seeing more requests, what we'll call credit-worthy borrowers, and while, of course, some of that is C&I loans, commercial, industrial, we're seeing it in the commercial real estate space. So I think if we're typical, and I think we are, that area that has been so weak in the private sector is turning around. The public sector we'll get to in a minute, state and local government, and the investments they make in infrastructure, and even there I think maybe things are starting to turn up a little bit. On the equipment and software side, that's where businesses have continued to hold back. We haven't seen much of an acceleration. I mean, it's been steady growth, 3 or 4%, probably was again in the first quarter when we get the data. So that's a little more questionable whether you're going to see an acceleration in equipment and spending. Capacity utilization rates are still fairly low, and that means the need isn't there, but in the technology side where things are new and improved, as opposed to just building another type of equipment or machinery. So I think we're going to see a little bit there as well. So when I add it up together on the private side, commercial real estate and business equipment and software, I think we'll see a bit faster economic growth or investment growth this year. On housing, we're going to see, because clearly the numbers on housing, even yesterday, the home builder survey came out for the month of April, and it was a little weaker than expected. So home builders are still saying, you know, they're not seeing people lined up at their offices or subdivisions to try to buy new homes. Existing homes, I think, are going to do better, but that's part of our forecast. And if it doesn't occur, if we can't sell 5 million existing homes, which would be up from last year, and closer to 500,000 new homes, or in other words, about 5.5 million homes, then you're right, we won't get that added momentum from the housing sector, which of course dovetails into consumer spending and other household items, furniture, apparel, well, not so much apparel, but appliances. We're going to have to see if that occurs as well. And I think it will, so that's where the housing fits in. Multifamily is very strong. In fact, as a bank, we're starting to worry about some overbuilding in multifamily that won't show up for a couple of years. The demand for rental is still quite strong, but 2 or 3 years from now, you might actually go from a sort of a renter's market or an owner's market to a rentee, if that's the right word. But right now, the balance is still, and that's why you're seeing rents rising. We've even seen a little bit of that in the CPI, faster rent increase. But for the near term, still a lot of activity going on in the rental condo apartment business, as a lot of younger people want to stay renters. They want to have the flexibility. They're not convinced about house prices. They may not have the down payment. They have a lot of student debt, so they may not qualify for a loan if they're in their 20s. They come to PNC or another company, and we'd like to lend the money, but we see they've just come out of school. They've got student debt. They don't qualify for a loan. So I think that's why, maybe different than our generation, 20 and 30-year-olds are going to be renters longer, both because they have to be and probably because they want to be, than maybe their parents or grandparents who, when we were in our 20s, we couldn't wait to buy a home. One, because we were secure in the knowledge that every night they went up in value. Then we went to bed, woke up in the morning, we were worth a couple of $1,000s more. On the West Coast, even more, because your houses always went up, and they did, of course, until they didn't. But they did from the end of World War II up until, of course, 6-7 years ago. But the most recent experience does show us that house prices can go down. So maybe you're not going to look at them as much as an investment property as, do you want to live there? And so that is something I'm trying to understand through my daughter and other younger people to understand really a different attitude. But not to belabor that, I do think that the housing market and the construction side, both private or single family and multifamily, is going to show a pretty healthy increase over the next couple of years, because I think we're fairly early on. And we also think house prices will appreciate. Last year you had this double-digit increase at the national level, but that's because so many of the sand states, Arizona and Vegas and parts of Florida, were growing 20, California growing 25%, but that's after having been off 50 or 60, and that sort of distorted the numbers. I can assure you that in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and so many areas around here, the East Coast and the Midwest, including New Jersey, prices weren't going up 10, 12%. They were probably growing up 3, 4%, and the national numbers are 10% or 11, at least the Case-Shiller numbers, but that's because of a tremendous contribution from a few areas that were the most hard hit and the impact they had on the national numbers. I think some of that will slow down. Even Bob Shiller himself, who I saw on CNBC, thinks that that his own calculations are not going to be double-digit anymore, and I think that's probably reasonable, but not back to negative, but 3 or 4%. So still some wealth effect, still bringing people out of short sales or situations where they're underwater, so you get a little bit of a wealth effect, also reinforcing the consumer spending. Autos looking very strong. In the first quarter, we had a bit of a mini inventory correction. Auto production was down at a 20% rate, in part because sales weakened, whether that was weather or not. They were producing too many cars, but sales picked up in March, best month they've seen in the recovery, and production plans from the auto dealers are basically to restore auto production in the spring and summer to the same pace it was in the second half of last year. So again, a little bit of a mini inventory correction in autos had some effect on the GDP growth in the first quarter, part of that slowdown, But unless sales fall, back down towards 15 million, and I don't think they will, somewhere closer to 16 million, they're going to produce a lot more cars and trucks and probably sell them. And that's going to be a positive not only for the second quarter, but going through the rest of the year. And one more I'll throw in. I'm sort of doing a C plus I plus G, but the G, government. We talked about the federal government, but I think there's been a real sea change in state and local government. We are seeing, for the first time in a while, state governments in particular and local governments being able to hire and being able to do some investment. It took them years to get their budgets in order, many of which had balanced budgets requirements. Places like California, places like Pennsylvania. Late last year, Pennsylvania passed a highway construction bill. Passed after a lot of hand-wringing, it passed in our legislature. We raised our state tax, gas tax, I think it was 5-6 cents a gallon, it'll go up. But it also means we're going to spend in this state over the next, I think, 4 years, $2 billion on highway investment. Not only can the state probably use that, but that's something went to happen 2 or 3 years ago. The state of Pennsylvania was not in either a political or an economic position where it could have passed a gas tax hike and a major multi-year infrastructure, mainly highway infrastructure plan. And it's not just Pennsylvania. Some of that's happening in California. Some of it's happening in other parts of Chicago or Illinois. Illinois is probably still the weakest of all. But we are seeing state governments come back into budget balance or even into surplus and be able to restore some of the people and the projects that have been put off. And at the local level, the reason the states are doing better is their income is state tax income and sales tax. Well, more people are working, they're getting more income taxes, and spending's going up, and now even some of the things you buy on Amazon, you have to pay state taxes on. So the revenues have started to increase, and that's what helped the states. Local, as we know, is more dependent on property taxes. Well, houses are going up in most places around the country, and even with assessments typically lagging the actual rise in investments, but it won't take long for local assessors to recognize that prices are rising again. Revenues at the school districts and at local municipalities are going to go up as well. And we're going to see them also, I think, be able to start some projects, hire some people, particularly public safety, teachers, to bring them back. And we've actually seen the jobs at state government or local government, state and local, have risen over the last 8 or 9 months. Not by much, but after falling in 10, 11, 12, and through the first half of 13. So I think the state and local governments are going to have some money to spend on infrastructure projects and to do some hiring of individuals that they haven't been able to do. So when you sort of add up my view, consumers hanging in there, business investment improving a bit, federal government sort of less of a headwind, state and local governments a little bit of a positive, and housing and autos doing well. And then the final thing that Catherine and others will talk about is the global picture and, can there be any lift from our exports? What we see with Europe now growing again. Europe's 20% of all of our exports go to Europe. Of course, Canada and Mexico are 2 major trading partners, but I think we're likely to see some growth in exports as the world economy is doing better, particularly our North American neighbors and Europe, where a lot of our exports are concentrated. So you put that all together, and it gets me to 2.5 to 3% GDP this year, 2.5 million jobs, an unemployment rate by year end that's down around 6.2%, and no reason to think, at the end of this year that we can't carry on some of that momentum, depending on so many things between now and then, as we even get into to 2015. But that's sort of the broad economic view. In terms of inflation, I think inflation in terms of rate of growth has probably hit bottom. I'm not amongst the deflation fear crowd. I really think what the Fed is doing, well, it might not have given us the kind of inflation some might have feared. I think it is totally at odds with a deflationary environment. And I think we are going to see a gradual up creep which is what the Fed wants and what the Fed actually forecasts in terms of inflation, whether it's a CPI or the Fed prefers the PCE, personal consumption expenditure deflator. They are running all below 2% with food, without food, with energy, without energy, however you want to cut it, although the Cleveland Fed does a median CPI, which kind of takes out the tails, the things that are going down the most, which lately have been a lot of energy, not I should say gasoline, not utilities, and on the high side, and kind of gives you a median. That's been running around 2%. If you want to check that out, it's on the Cleveland Fed website. The Dallas Fed does something similar to that as well. So there are some measures that suggest inflation could be a little bit closer to 2% than the CPI or some of the other measures are suggesting. But I think we're headed towards 2%, even as the Fed tapers, and Bill Pull will be talking about that. Our view is the Fed will continue to taper $10 billion until they're done, which means October, November. They won't deviate from their path. We think the first Fed funds rate hike probably comes in the final quarter of next year, and over the following 2 or 3 years, you see what I'll call a normalization of rates back up into the 3 or 4% range for short rates, and probably 4 to 5% range for longer rates, and maybe 6% for mortgage rates. That's a strategic view. PNC Investment, our wealth management, has for a year and a half sort of been avoiding bonds, or not avoiding them, but trying to reduce them as a share of our portfolio, putting on the investment cap for a minute, and thinking stocks look a lot better than bonds. And while we might be going through a correction in the stock market now, and who knows, and of course if you turn on CNBC, you can still find, what's his name, doom and gloom report, what is that guy, who will come on, what's his name? Faber, yes, and others like him. I call them the vampire economists, that will always come out at the first bad day on the market and tell you this is the beginning of a 20 or 30% downdraft. Unless the economy is much weaker and earnings are much weaker, given valuations, which are not stretched, not cheap, but not stretched, have a hard time believing the stock market goes down even beyond 10%, let alone 20 or 30, based on our economic point of view. So we still happen to like stocks a lot better than bonds, and think over the next several years, as was the case the last couple of years, not the last quarter, the stock market is going to be a much better investment place than the bond market. Let me just finish up and add one thing so I can do battle with my good friend Dunk. We have competing small business surveys. Now, I've only been doing mine for 12 years. He's been doing his, as his emeritus status would say, for how many? 50, 60, 80, 90, 100? 42. Only 42. So he's definitely got a longer track record than I do. And as you know, and I included this one page in the report attached to my newsletter, my survey, quote, PNC survey, is a bit more optimistic, with all due respects to our hostess today. And when we did our survey, we only do it twice a year. He does it every month. When we were in the field, actually in February. So the survey was conducted in February. It takes us about 3 weeks. Unlike him, it usually takes him 3 hours to conduct his survey and then put the results out. But so the results, or the survey was taken in February, lousy weather. But like Dunk in many cases, we're asking our small business owners to look forward the rest of this year. And I was actually quite encouraged that the responses about job intentions, about sales expectations, hiring, investment, was actually the most positive our survey has shown since 07 or 08. You'd have to go back to 06 and into 07 to find a mindset. Whether or not that turns into action, we'll have to see. But the intentions were, and when we asked the businesses how they feel about their company, 37% said they were optimistic. Now, that's the highest number. Now, you could say that means 63% weren't. That meant they were either moderately optimistic and a few were pessimistic. But viewing this as trends, and it's not seasonally adjusted, so I tend to think of it as compared to last spring rather than last fall, because there may be some seasonal differences between a spring survey and an autumn survey. But no matter how I cut it, the numbers were encouraging. We'll have to see whether those, as they say, are borne out. But despite Healthcare, the ACA, despite some hikes in minimum wage, businesses were more positive about their view of their company's prospects, profitability, hiring, investment than they've been in a while. Is it back to normal? No. Like Dunk's survey, it's not back to sort of my track record isn't as long, so it's not sort of back to where it was in 05, 06, just barely into 07, but it's a noticeable improvement. So we'll see if it comes true, but I view that as somewhat of a, because we all agree small businesses are very important, but I view that as at least a positive sign, lending credence to a forecast that economic growth this year, overall, jobs, employment, GDP, sales, will be better than last year, and that small businesses, what we call the grassroots of the American economy, will actually be doing some hiring and see some better sales and respond with some better investments and be part of what helps the U.S. economy get out of this 2% GDP growth rut and hopefully work its way up to at least 2.5% or 3%, and we'll see whether it comes to pass or not. Starts rose 2.8%. Permits fell. Well, could have been a little better. At least it's up. It's still got a long way to go to get better. It's probably not at 1 million, right? It's probably less than 1 million. 940. I think our forecast for the year is close to 1 million. So clearly in the first quarter, we're below that. So it sort of goes to what I said. If that had been down 5 or 10%, I'd have said, never mind. And I'd have given you a brand new forecast, totally free of charge. But at least in the first time I would have had to revoke a forecast before I even said thank you very much and concluded the response. So I'll leave it at that and say I'll still remain a bit on the optimistic side, and hopefully that'll set the stage for some of the discussions later on by the other very good panelists who are here to follow. Thank you very much. Time for Q&A or not.
I get to go first.
You go. You get the rebuttal.
You can sit right there.
Never insult your host.
Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, well, as Stu said, small businesses are important. If you look at the government data and look at what the SBA claims, small businesses produce about half of the private GDP and employ about half of the private sector workforce. My guess is those numbers are a little worse now if you could get really current data, but it takes a while to kind of partition those data and separate them out. There are 6 million employer firms in the United States, 6 million who pay Social Security on at least one worker. 90% of them have fewer than 20 workers, so that's like 5.5 million are under 20 employees. So small businesses are small, and they when you add them up, it's big business. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a picture of where the economy looks from the small business perspective. I've been arguing that we really have a bifurcated economy, that the small business sector is barely growing. It grows a little bit because it really is affected by population growth. Every year we have 3 million new people added. That's 3 million more haircuts. GE does not give haircuts. Well, it may be on some things, but not on heads. Anyway, so that's barbershops and these kinds of things. That's the service sector that's dominated by small businesses. So you get a little bit of growth, but if you think about the small business sector growing, say, 1%, and the big guys doing about 4%, because the big sector's been doing pretty well, as we'll see, you kind of average, 1 plus 4 divided by 2 is 2.5, and that's kind of the kind of growth we're looking at. So hopefully the big players will keep doing well, especially if exports can hold up as predicted, and we hope that the small business sector will come along and where do I point this thing, right here? Oh, this one? Oh, it went to sleep on us. Hey, we got it. Okay. This is easy to see. The blue line is real gross domestic product. You can see the recession and recovery. We're producing much more output today than we did at the peak in 2007. December of '07 is the official peak. The red line is employment. You see it peaks late in '07. Actually, the big number is January of '08. And then, of course, employment also falls. And then what I want you to see is that even though we're producing a lot more output today than we did back at the peak, we have not re-employed all those workers. So we're running like 1 million workers short. Some people say that's a great story for productivity, and certainly productivity did improve during the recession. You do learn how to work with less and do better and take care of the P's and Q's and the details. But I think really it's mostly a change in the composition of GDP. And here's what it looks like. That's housing starts. You can see housing starts went up to a 2.2 million annual rate and then fell all the way to 500,000. When you're in a hole, right, you stop digging. We did finally stop digging. The solid line is just a rough estimate, say, based on demographics, the fact that we have 3 million more people, that we have household formations, et cetera, how many steady state starts should we have? And the answer would be about 1.5 million. But we can argue about that. My point is that we're missing hundreds of thousands of housing starts from the GDP numbers. Housing is very labor intensive, very labor intensive. So how come GDP is so much bigger? Well, we've substituted manufacturing output, for example, which is terrific. We do have a lot of manufacturing output, and it's been doing very well. But we do need to catch up with this. We will catch up with this. That is, housing starts have got to go back up there somehow because the people are here and the population keeps growing. We need the houses. The housing inventory is very low. So I think that that'll improve. You can see what happened to ownership here. Barney Frank wanted to get everybody into affordable housing. He failed. He got us into unaffordable housing. So there's the result. But you can see everything to the right of that line, right, is our renters now. All right, so we had this big conversion. So we still have 1 million people living in houses. I guess they're underwater. We're just trying to figure out whether they're going to be owners or renters, right? So it's a nasty, nasty transition to have to be in. The game that the big financial firms played was very painful for a lot of ordinary folk, and that would be part of it. Interesting how big the decline here in home ownership is for the age 35 to 55 people. Those are the ones, I guess, who bit and got bitten, and so the adjustment is pretty painful. Not only did we build too many houses in the 03 to 07 period, but we built too many small businesses, strip malls, restaurants, retail outlets, and we filled them up with inventory based on the fact that the savings rate was about 2% in the fourth quarter of '08, and suddenly we got scared and we increased our saving rate to about 6%, both of which are terrible numbers, but every point in the savings rate is $100 billion in spending. So kind of in the fourth quarter of '08, we cut our spending, you and I, consumers, at about a $500 billion annual rate, and of course that sent the economy into a tailspin. So you see we lost a lot of firms. The blue line is the firms that we lost. The red line is, of course, new starts. These come with a lag because it takes a while to find out whether somebody's failed and so on. But the story kind of is now, you can see that we do have more starts than we have terminations, but both of them are very low levels. So we're happy to see terminations at very low levels now. We've adjusted the stock of firms to your demands, but we'd like to see more starts because that's, of course, a job generator, and it's not as strong as we'd like it to be. Just the unemployment rate to remind you kind of what it looks like and where it's been. And here I have my interest rates and stock market chart. So talk about a bifurcated economy. You've got record high stock market with 6.7% unemployment, millions of people unemployed, There's the bifurcation. How's that happening? So the 1-year Treasury is on the zero line, sitting right there at about 20 basis points or whatever. And there's your stock market up there. And all of us want to know, and maybe we'll find out today, what's going to happen as tapering happens and normalization happens. What impact will this have on the bifurcation? Consumers are pessimistic. This is the University of Michigan Index of Consumer Sentiment. I did this as a graduate student for 5 years at a date far to the left of 1978. But the all-time highs in 2000, we all thought we were, of course, saved with the .com, the catfood.com. We could retire with that. Didn't quite work out. But my point is consumers are not optimistic. If you're not optimistic and you're uncertain about the future, you're cautious. That means you spend a little bit less, and if everybody spends a little bit less, that's slow spending. So you drive the car another year instead of buying a new one this year. You can do that because cars are better now, and that's what it goes. This is what the index looks like, looking at the top third, middle third, and bottom third of the income distribution. You can see that the top third are doing very well, are happy. They're the ones who own all those stocks that are at record high levels. But the optimism, it does seem to have picked up in the middle third now in the past couple of quarters, but certainly the lower third are not looking very good and that, in terms of that. Michigan also asks, what people think about government policy. Do you think it's good, fair, or bad? This is the net percent who say good. So you see we went down as low as -50. The red dots, the red line is for the current administration, but you can see we've been losing faith in government's ability to deal with the problems that we have now for some time. And until confidence is restored, I think that's one of the things, as Stu pointed out, is going to stand in the way of consumers coming back and spending and being willing to commit to the future. They're very uncertain about the future. Here's my small business optimism index. It's kind of similar. It's structured similarly to the Michigan index because that's where I learned how to do that stuff. The picture's real clear. Look to the right-hand side. Small business owners are not optimistic, and you can see how that shapes up historically. And every one of those dots is a quarter. We do big surveys January, April, July, and October. So that's the big dots. And then I've got, so we did a January survey with about 2,000 responses. And then the February and the March surveys, they all have about 800. But you can see there's really not much happening here. They are not very optimistic about the future. Do you think business conditions 6 months from now will be better or worse than they are today? Well, it's a big negative number. Far more owners think that 6 months from March, that was the thing we just got through, the business conditions will be worse than they are today, than think it'll be better. Well, that's not very good for spending and hiring. It's not going to work out too well. How about here we go. Is now a good time to expand your business? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear. No. And it's been no for years. There's no confidence that now is a good time to put their money on the table. This is not, Twitter money. This is their own money. Their source of capital is the bottom line of the firm. They are not willing to bet that money, and until that changes, we're again going to have a slow small business sector. Of those who said it's a bad time to expand, so about 10% said good time to expand before seasonal adjustment, 60% said bad, and the other group in the middle said, I don't know, I'm uncertain. So of the 60% who said it's a bad time to expand, we then said, why? And 60% of them said, because the economy's weak, sales are weak, but almost 30% here have said, because of the political climate. That's the reason I won't expand. It's a bad time to expand. Well, if Washington could at least fix that, we could get those people moving. You can see where you and I stopped spending money back in 2008. This is quarter-on-quarter sales changes. Are your sales trending up or down? Terrible. Now we're getting back, but we're still not seeing the strength in sales that we really need to see. How about looking forward over the next 3 months? Will the real volume of goods and services, not nominal, of course inflation is not a big issue, but will your real volume of sales be higher or lower? Well, that's a very negative set of expectations. So again, if that's your view about your sales, you're not going to hire, you're not going to buy inventory, you're not going to expand your business, you're not going to do any of the things that would generate GDP and create jobs, and that's of course what we'd like to see. You hear a lot from Washington and in the press about the fact that the reason that the small business sector is not doing well is nobody will lend it money. Well, I am the chairman of a little bank, and that's our market. We lend to small businesses. And I give talks to the bankers, from California bankers to all the way to the Jersey bankers coming up in a few weeks. I get the same story. They all say we have money to lend. We don't have good applicants coming in. Well, this might be the reason here. So I asked them if all their credit needs were met over the last 3 months. 30% said yes, 5% say no. The lowest it's ever been is 4% in 2000. So we don't have too many complaints here. And over 50% say, who wants a loan? And if you add the 13% who don't answer the question, you really have almost 2/3 of my 350,000 member firms saying, I don't want a loan. What would I do with the money? Look at my view of the future. I need to put the money to work in some place where it'll generate some revenue back so I can pay the loan back. That's what the bank expects. And I don't see that happen. So they're sitting on the sidelines. is credit a problem? So we say, what's the most important problem facing your business today? Inflation's the all-time winner back in the pre-80, most of you are too young, so you don't remember that, pre-83. Then when Volcker comes in, of course, the availability of credit's a real issue, and its cost. And you can see the blue lines, boom. But I defy you to find the so-called credit crunch that we just went through in 07, 08, 09 in that blue line. You saw concern in the first quarter of 08 about inflation because we had a big surge in energy costs, but of course that was quickly dissipated as the economy fell into a recession. There's no complaints on Main Street about credit. They just don't want it. And until they have a better view of the future, they're not going to borrow it. You can see who fired everybody. GE didn't fire many people in the recession because they only employ 150,000 people in the U.S. And we lost like 8 million in the recession or something like that. So you can see who was doing it. But we're kind of back to normal here in terms of the number of people we hire, the net increase in workers per firm. But you remember that earlier chart, there's far fewer firms. We lost an awful lot of firms. So we're back to hiring. We just have fewer firms, so we're not getting the same kick on the employment numbers that we had before. The blue line is the percent of owners who said, I reduced employment, so that means they destroyed jobs. The red line is the percent who said, I created jobs, that is, I'm hiring more people. So you can see why today the initial claims for unemployment are really low, because we're stopped firing people. So the blue line is really low now historically. The problem is the red line also is, that is, we're not hiring. So we've adjusted the stock of the inventory of workers to kind of what we need, but no reason to now add to that stock, and so we're not hiring. So you can see our job creation plans. Do you plan to increase or decrease the total number of people working for you? Are weak historically, and it's just not there. Capital outlays, no. You know, why would I make capital expenditure? Roof leaks, fix that. Equipment dies, fix that. But beyond that, there's no money going into this stuff. So that's my reminder, this is an election year. And policy, all of the stuff you're going to hear about policy, of course, is vote driven. Nothing good is going to happen, I think, to really address the concerns of small businesses and make them more optimistic about the future, until maybe we at least get through the election and we can see some other kinds of things happening. And then I just put this up for transparency, so I'll just read this last one. Janet said, so the language that we used in the statement is considerable period. So this is the kind of term it's hard to define, but probably means something on the order of around 6 months, that type of thing. With that clarity, we're ready to move ahead. Thanks. All right, so let's take a few. We have 5 minutes for questions. Anybody have questions for our forecasting expert here? There's one over here. Yep.
Well, you bring up the unemployment rates, but you don't bring up the decline in labor force participation or the U6 percentage of employment. Like the U6 that's released by the BLS. Why did you not bring that up?
Because I don't have enough time. The question was, why didn't I talk about the U6 and the change in the participation rate? Well, that's certainly a concern. Remember, we measure unemployment, of course. The policy goal we have is if you want a job, we want you to have a job. So that's the concept behind the U3. We ask you if you want a job, and if you're looking for a job, then we count you unemployed if you don't have it. Otherwise, you have it. And then you're out of the labor force. So people are now leaving the labor force. The question is why? There are lots of old people like me leaving the labor force, and that's okay. We knew that was going to happen. The question is how many of them are leaving because they give up, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the U6 concept. People who are working part-time because they but want to work full-time, but they can't get a full-time job. So the U6 is running around 13% compared to the 6.7% that we have here. But so it's a concern. We look at it, but
quick observation. Labor force participation of people 55 and over is rising.
Rising, right?
And the absolute number of people employed in that age group did not fall during the recession. The issue is the prime age workers.
Right.
I guess on a side note, it's kind of hard to justify that older people, especially with what he said, are leaving the market, because you don't go from 65.5% of the those over 18 in the workforce all of a sudden going down to 63.2%. What do you think is discouraging young people from joining the market? or joining the labor force, I mean?
Well, in the first quarter, there was quite a big increase, but we'll have to see whether or not that is going to change the downtrend. It certainly moderated a little bit, but your point is well taken that over the last couple of years, and as Bill added, it is those prime age workers. Now, I suspect some of them would be people your age who are staying in school longer because I think the benefits to that are worth the cost and time and effort, and hopefully they're making a good decision on that. There was some discussion about disability, that more people were going on disability. There was just, I guess it just came out in the first quarter of the last couple of years. They've tightened the eligibility rules, and for the first time, I think it was either the fourth or first quarter, they have the latest data. There are fewer people eligible for disability than there was the year before. So some of those individuals, legitimate or not, have found that they can basically get permanent unemployment by being on disability. But I suspect that, the heart of the issue is what you're talking about. A lot of those individuals have just been discouraged in that prime age group. They've just not felt that they can get a job or retain a job or get a job worth that pays them what they think they're worth and probably are worth. And so a lot of people have dropped out. What I always wonder about is we don't have any good measures on the so-called underground economy. Are these people really working in some ways, just quote, off the books? And, because you have to live somehow. So are they living with their parents? Are they really, starving? Or more than likely, I suspect the underground economy that we don't measure, the so-called, unmeasurable underground economy, has probably grown over the last couple of years as individuals who have, either because of tax reasons or because they can't get a job they want, have still found they can kind of moonlight and do types of things. That is not a desirable situation. I'm not suggesting it is, but it is sort of making the best with what you have. And if I'm right, or in general, over the next several years, the economy does do better, we should see a stabilization in the participation rate, maybe even an increase in the prime age participation rate over the next several years as job opportunities become more available at wages that are attractive.
Mickey, real quick.
Both of you mentioned productivity, and Dunk, you showed that GDP is above its prior expansion peak, but employment is still shy of that. And we see record-breaking profits, higher returns to capital, the labor share as a percentage of GDP shrinking. I can't understand why the product, and we see all this anecdotal evidence of technological innovations in various forms of production processes and new production. Why aren't the productivity numbers stronger? It seems to be a missing link.
Can you all hear him in the back?
Yep.
I don't think the microphone's working.
Yeah,
he's saying all these good things are
repeat it.
happening. Why aren't the productivity numbers showing
Why aren't the
better
productivity
productivity?
numbers showing stronger, reflecting the technological innovations and the record-breaking profits?
I'm not sure that it's on. No, it is. Wow. Just not very loud.
Well,
I don't have a good answer.
I don't have a
That's all.
good. The question was basically the lack of productivity growth in the last couple of years. It was quite strong.
Measured productivity
yes.
growth, yeah.
It was quite strong at the beginning of the recovery back in 2010-11, which is often the case. But rather than remain strong, in fact, I think over the last year it's barely been positive. And if you believe the first quarter numbers, while they haven't come out yet, the implication of the increase in hours worked that we know about and GDP that's likely to be less than 2% would imply that the first quarter was another bummer quarter for productivity growth. Mickey, it's a great question. I don't have a good answer as well as to why productivity growth seems to be so low, measured official productivity growth. Something has to do with services versus production and the measurement issues, but I would have thought productivity would have been better and reflected in higher output growth rather than say you needed even fewer employees to generate the type of output growth because they were each more productive.
My hunch is eventually somebody's going to show research showing that we mismeasured productivity, that to reconcile the record-breaking profits and with higher measured productivity and maybe even higher measured GDP growth.
So Mickey thinks that one of the economic scholars in here will do some research that will resolve that issue. All right, well, Stu, thank you very much. You were terrific.
Thank you, Dunk.